This is a true story. The reconstructions are based on original cockpit voice recordings and eyewitness accounts. Modern airliners are among the most complex and reliable machines in common use, but occasionally, delays in fixing a known problem have led to catastrophe. This is the story of one of the most terrifying and tragically avoidable accidents in recent history. It shows what happens when a 747 suffers a devastating explosion at high altitude, and how the crew struggled with an unprecedented crisis. It is also a powerful personal story of grief and a relentless investigation to uncover the full, disturbing truth.
Lee can't have died for nothing. You know, you've got to find out why he died, and you've just got to make sure that it never happens again.
And it reveals how other, known problems in aircraft design have continued to go uncorrected, causing further avoidable accidents.
So would I be surprised if it happened again? I would be surprised if it didn't happen again. It is a matter of time.
One of the most shocking cases of a known design flaw being ignored for years finally took its toll on a United Airlines 747 bound from Honolulu to Auckland, New Zealand. As Flight 811 prepared for takeoff, no one on board thought there could be a serious weakness in the aircraft. But the crew were concerned by another recent tragedy.
We were in the aftermath of Lockerbie, and I had instructed the crew to be particularly aware because it was a through flight from Los Angeles going through to New Zealand. So in my pre-flight briefing, I had asked them to make sure that they checked any baggage that looked suspicious or anything, because we wanted to be extra cautious.
Flight 811 was heavily loaded, 337 passengers, crowded cargo holds, and a full fuel load. The doors closed on time, and the plane left the gate just before 2 o'clock in the morning for a routine 8-hour flight.
Well, we were going to New Zealand on vacation, someplace that we had really thought was interesting, and somebody had told us how beautiful it was, so this was kind of a dream come true.
I was seated in what's called the upper deck. I hadn't had a vacation in 5 years. And I took all my Mileage Plus points from United Airlines, and I purchased a business class ticket to Auckland, New Zealand, and Sydney, Australia. And I was going to finally make that dream vacation I'd always wanted, to get to Australia and lay on a beach somewhere and forget about airplanes, forget about accidents, and get this out of my mind for a while.
On the flight deck, Captain Dave Cronin was hugely experienced, just 2 months short of retirement.
I flew almost 35 years with United. I've got over 30,000 hours of flight time and just about everything, military as well as civilian. My co-pilot, our first officer, was Al Slater. And I've known Al at that time for probably 20 years. And the second officer, Mark Thomas, was the first time I had flown with him. But we got along really. So I left the seatbelt sign on.
Captain Cronin's decision to keep people fastened in their seats would save the lives of many.
We were still climbing out, and the seatbelt sign was still on, and just basically getting ready to serve beverages and then to tuck everyone in for the evening because it was going to be a long flight down to New Zealand.
Okay, tell them we're going to detour over to the left.
Center, United 811 Heavy, we're going to be detouring. Some weather here. It'll be to the left, of course.
100 miles from Honolulu, as Flight 811 climbed through 23,000 feet, a major malfunction was about to occur. There was now a huge air pressure difference between the inside and outside of the aircraft. Suddenly, passengers sitting just above and behind the cargo door heard a noise.
Then there was kind of a grinding noise.
I heard like a thud.
The hell?
In the next nanosecond, it was pure, unadulterated pandemonium.
We lost number 3. Going down.
It looks like we've lost number 3 engine and we're descending rapidly. Coming back.
The next thing I knew, I found myself on the stairwell, hanging onto the rungs, and I immediately knew it was an explosive decompression.
The cargo door had torn off and ripped a huge section of the plane with it. The pressurized air inside blasted out with explosive force.
I immediately thought of Lockerbie. We actually thought it was a bomb that went off.
It was hell on earth. Everything on the airplane that wasn't fastened down, tied down, or secured became airborne. The noise was incredible.
Everything in front of us was gone. Where we were sitting, we were about 6 inches from the hole, so there was nothing in front of us or to the side of us. The whole side of the plane was gone. Actually, our feet were dangling on the hole, and I first thought we weren't going to make it. You know, I just didn't think there was any hope.
With pressurized air blown out, the lack of oxygen at 23,000 feet was now suffocating the passengers and crew.
It felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach, knocked the wind out of me. And I remember trying to catch my breath and couldn't. You're supposed to grab those oxygen masks and put them on, except the oxygen masks in that cabin, they were ripped out of the ceiling and they weren't there. And I remember thinking to myself, this is what it feels like to suffocate.
United 811 Heavy, we're doing an emergency descent.
The pilots could tell from their instruments that the number 3 engine was failing, but they couldn't tell the full extent of the damage. Their priority was to get the plane down to a level where they could breathe normally.
Put your mask on, Dave.
But the pilots also didn't know that the explosion had destroyed the aircraft's entire oxygen supply.
Can't get any oxygen.
We're not getting any oxygen. You getting any?
I can't get any either.
With the plane heading steeply down and no word from the cockpit, the cabin crew feared the worst.
I remember thinking that the cockpit, which is up in the upper deck, had probably blown off the airplane too, because as far up as we could see, there was nothing there.
Leaving 15.
United 811 Heavy, we're out of 15.5.
United 11, roger.
I think we blew a door or something.
Tell a flight attendant to get prepared for an evacuation.
The crew finally began to level out at a safer altitude, but they now faced a barrage of problems. The most immediate was the disintegration of the number 3 engine nearest to the explosion.
We don't have any fire indications?
I don't have anything.
Okay, we lost number 3. Let's shut it down. There's no M1.
Yeah, okay. Ready for number 3 shutdown checklist.
Number 3. Before you shut down number 3, the generator went off. Looks all right to try it now.
Well, let's stop the vibration anyway.
Fuel jettison procedure. Main boost pumps on.
Center, United 811. We need the equipment standing by. Company notified, please.
Got a control problem.
Roger.
Center wing. Left, right. Valves on.
Start dumping the fuel.
I am dumping.
One stewardess had been seriously injured by debris. As Laura Brettlinger helped her, the full gravity of their situation suddenly became clear.
As I'm holding her in my arms, I looked up, and as I looked up, that was the first time I saw this tremendous hole on the side of the aircraft that was just a void, and seats were missing, and I immediately knew that we had lost passengers.
5 rows of seats had been blown out in the decompression, killing 9 passengers. On the flight deck, the crew had turned the stricken plane back to Honolulu, but with 128 kilometers still to go, the crisis now got far worse.
We got a hell of a control problem here. I got almost full rudder on this thing.
Are you dumping as fast as you can?
I'm dumping everything.
We got a problem with number 4 engine?
Yeah.
Debris from the explosion had also damaged the number 4 engine. If it failed completely, the implications were severe.
If you're on 2 engines and you weigh 700,000 pounds, that is a big deal. Simply because with that kind of weight, 2 engines are not going to keep you in the air. You're going to come down.
Can you maintain 240?
Yeah, just barely.
We're losing altitude.
Know it.
Center, United 811 Heavy. Do you have a fix on us?
Affirmative, sir. I have you on radar.
Okay, we've lost engine number 3, and we don't have full power on engine number 4. We can't hold altitude right now. We're dumping fuel, so...
United 811 Heavy, roger. I show you 60 miles south of Honolulu at this time.
Roger. I haven't talked to anybody yet. I can't get to them. You want me to go downstairs and take a look?
Yeah, let's see what's happening down there.
I think we lost a compressor, but...
Can't hold altitude.
Yeah, I told him that we're
Put
gonna...
some max on there. I got takeoff power on this thing.
Whatever you need, Captain.
Although the number 4 engine was failing, the pilots pushed it, along with the remaining engines, to full power, a setting they should not be run at for more than 2 minutes. But the nearest land was 15 minutes away.
I look out the window on the right-hand side, and I see flames, big flames. And I know what flames in the engine means. It's not good.
The pilots were unaware that number 4 engine was now on fire.
You got 250 knots now. That's good. 7,000...
Yeah, we're getting more rumble.
Watch.
Live, and there was a huge sense of relief for me. He saw the hole, turned as white as a sheet, and I screamed to him, "Dear God, please get us down."
You've got a fire out there.
Oh yeah, we got a fire in number 4. Go through the procedure. Shut down the engine.
You're not going to be able to hold this altitude on 2.
We got a fire on the right side. We're on 2 engines now.
The whole right side, it's just gone from about the one right back to it's just open. You're just looking outside.
What do you mean?
It looks like a bomb.
Fuselage?
Yeah, the fuselage, it's just open.
Okay, it looks like we got a bomb that went off on the right side. The whole right side is gone.
Yeah, from about the one right back to,
Anybody?
Some people are probably gone. I don't know.
I knew that we had lost people. I didn't know how many. In fact, I didn't know until the next day how many were lost. But, you know, it's a terrible thing when you're a captain of an airplane and you lose passengers.
Lee Campbell, flying home to New Zealand, was sitting in row 8 just in front of the cargo door.
I woke up with such a start because I'd seen Lee standing by the bed, just with a grey jacket over his arm and a small smile on his face. And of course, as I woke up, it faded, wasn't there. And then we woke up in the morning, we discussed this. I said, oh, you know, that was strange in the night, but it was such a vivid dream. Lee was standing there. And then the radio came on, and the first item of news is that there'd been a problem with the United aircraft. And I said, that was Lee, that's Lee's. And my blood just ran cold. I knew he was dead from that moment.
Center, do you read? We evidently had a bomb or something. A big section of the right side of the airplane is missing.
9811 Heavy, roger.
I wouldn't go any faster than I had to because that hole, I mean, I wouldn't get it over 250 knots because that's a big...
Okay, what's our stall speed?
I wouldn't go below 240.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to make this.
We didn't know that we were going to make it back. So we were actually preparing to ditch that airplane at night in the Pacific Ocean, which has never been done before.
In the cabin, the crew prepared for the worst.
My training kicked in and got up from my jump seat and started instructing the crew. We have to prepare the cabin. We have to, you know, prepare for a ditching, which I thought was inevitable.
You're running around getting life vests on, and I do remember thinking, I'm not sure this is going to matter, because when we hit the water, you know, I just imagine the plane's going to split apart.
I knew that if we hit the water, it'd be tantamount to hitting the ground, and there would be very few, if any, survivors. So my mind went to the things that meant something to me, and at that point in my life, it was my son.
Believing they were going to die, one passenger took these photographs in the hope they'd be found in the wreckage and give clues to the cause of the crash. For 15 minutes, the plane steadily lost altitude. Then at 4,000 feet, the first glimmer of hope.
After an imponderable time, I remember one of the passengers
We're 21 miles out. We're in good shape.
But the danger was far from over. At Honolulu Airport, an emergency was declared. All other aircraft were diverted and the rescue services prepared for the crash landing of a fully loaded airliner.
Hey, you want to give me some speeds?
Yeah, 150 is going to be your 2-engine. Use a 160.
Souls on board if you have it.
Okay, souls on board.
160 is the minimum.
Stand by, United 811 Heavy.
I don't know how many's on board. 200 and, I don't have the paperwork in front of me here.
We're too busy right now. 200 and something.
6 minutes from the airport, the crew now had to slow down the overweight plane for landing. But the effect of this was unknown.
What's going to happen when I start coming out with flaps and landing gear? We're either going to land on the airport, in the water, or downtown Honolulu.
Okay, we'll try 10. Okay, inboards are coming to 10. How do the controls feel?
All right so far.
But the flaps were damaged and could not fully extend. This meant that Flight 811 would have to land dangerously fast.
You have 811 Heavy. Do you have the airport in sight?
It's over here to the right, Captain.
Okay.
Okay, we have the airport. United 811 Heavy.
811 is clear to land 8 left. Equipment standing by. Wind 05012.
Clear to land. 8 left, United 811 Heavy.
As the unstable 747 lined up for landing, the pilots knew they would only have one chance. But even if they got it on the runway, the nagging question remained. Would the stress of impact cause the damaged and overweight aircraft to disintegrate? Severely damaged, with an unstable airframe and losing altitude on just 2 engines, Flight 811 now began its final approach to Honolulu Airport.
2-engine approach.
2-engine approach.
We still had no idea how far off the ground we were, if we were going to make it to Honolulu or not. But that seemed like an appropriate time. If we were somewhere around land, that we're probably going to try and land somewhere to get the passengers in their brace positions. So that's when we started yelling for them to get down in their brace positions.
Every molecule in my body combined to express, get this damn airplane on the ground.
Well, how are we doing on the hydraulics?
Hydraulics are good.
You got brakes?
Normal hydraulics.
So we got brakes, but you're only going to have reversing on 1 and 2.
Though I thought maybe there was a chance that we were going to actually be able to attempt to land, the thought came to my mind, what happens now? Do we, on impact, do we explode? Do we fall out this huge hole?
Despite dumping fuel, the aircraft was still critically overweight, but without full flaps to keep it in the air. It had to approach fast.
1,000 down.
The danger was that the undercarriage could shear off and the plane break up.
Top and a half high. 190. 185. A little slow, Dave. It's below what we want. Coming up on the glide slope.
Okay. Now let's try the gear.
No one knew if the explosion had damaged the landing gear.
I remember Laura saying to me that she didn't hear the landing gear go down. And it was loud, it was still loud, and I didn't hear the landing gear go down. So that's another thought. Maybe they can't get the landing gear down. Maybe it's not down.
You've got the gear down, we're clear to land, and everything's taken care of as far as we know. $200. 195. Half a dot high. Looking good. 192. 195.
Coming off on the power.
100 feet. 50 feet.
Center the trim.
30. 10. 0.
We're on.
Gear's holding.
We landed. It felt fast. And that was my next concern, is that we weren't going to stop at the end of the runway, that we were just going to keep going.
And all of a sudden, we were slowing down, and I said, "Oh my God, we've landed. We're on ground." And the people started applauding.
Probably the best landing I've ever made. When we finally stopped on the runway, we deployed all 10 chutes, and the flight attendants evacuated all the passengers.
It's amazing how fast everyone went. My understanding is like less than 45 seconds, 330 people were off the airplane.
We were probably 20 feet off the ground, and I would have stepped out of the airplane without a slide. I wanted to get off so bad.
When we got all our switches off, I ran through the airplane, made sure there was no one else on the airplane, came up to the door one left, and went down the slide, and I came around the front and I saw that humongous hole in the side, and I just couldn't believe it. By the grace of God, we made it, and it was an awesome experience. I would never want to go through that again.
It was crazy, it was wild, it was scary, all at the same time. I just thought that was the end, that we were going to die. I mean, that was my first thought, that this is the end.
But for the families of the 9 people who were killed, the ordeal was just beginning. Kevin and Susan Campbell's son, Lee, had been flying home.
About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think they said that there was no New Zealanders involved, but we just knew that it was Lee. And then about, I suppose, a quarter of an hour later, we got a phone call from Chicago, and they just said that they regret to inform us that our son was missing, presumed dead. And I guess about another hour after that, a policeman arrived at the door, and he took one look at us and he says, "I can see that you've had the news." So it was just an awful day. And it certainly didn't get much better for a long time.
Although Lee's body had not been recovered, the Campbells flew straight to the wrecked aircraft in Honolulu.
Your initial feeling is that you want to be as close to the spot where your relative died, and that was the aircraft. So we had to immediately go in and see the aircraft.
The damage inside was horrific, just a total mess. And the hole in the side of the aircraft was much bigger than I had thought it would be, even though we had seen television newsreel reports. And it was so sad to get in and actually see where Lee's seat had been. The legs of the seat were still there. There was a good bit of fuselage beside him, and still a window.
But the Campbells' desire to find the cause of Lee's death inevitably brought them face to face with the dreadful details.
They took us to the medical examiner's office as well, because they had found body parts and that sort of thing. So they didn't actually show us the body parts, but they showed us bits and pieces that they had recovered from the engines, and we got the medical examiner's report on what they had recovered. So, you know, we really would have preferred that it was Lee that went through the engine, because it would have been an immediate death, whereas it was a 4-minute fall down to the ocean, and we know that the people could have been alive as they were falling. And when you think about that, that's just horrific.
As it became clear that their son's body would never be found, the Campbells' need to find the cause of the accident that killed him grew stronger.
Lee can't have died for nothing. You know, you've got to find out why he died and you've just got to make sure that it never happens again.
The Campbells embarked on a relentless personal investigation that would last nearly 2 years. But the loss of their son meant they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth.
The engines number 3 and 4.
2 months after the accident on Flight 811, when the National Transportation Safety Board held preliminary hearings, the Campbells made sure they were there. But they soon grew frustrated. The NTSB would not complete its report for months, so the Campbells took matters into their own hands.
This accident was the sudden opening.
We certainly weren't going to leave it to the NTSB to come up with the findings. We were going to follow through. And when the hearings ended, they had said that we could take whatever we wanted off the press table. And Susan walked up to the top table and yelled out, "There's a really good setup here." So grabbed a box and loaded in all of the documents that we could find up there.
Kevin's the most honest of people I know, but here he was taking something that we hadn't specifically been told we could take.
And we're heading out the door just as the NTSB were arriving back in with the trolley to pick up all their documents. So we were out the door and into a taxi and gone.
So we quickly realised we'd got a really good set of papers with a lot of things that hadn't been released to the public. We were able to really start our investigation in earnest at that stage.
The unpublished documents revealed a disturbing catalogue of problems with the forward cargo door, going right back to its original design. Instead of a plug door that gets jammed into its frame as the aircraft pressurizes, Boeing opted for an outward opening door. This allowed for more cargo space, but was not fail-safe like the plug design. So Boeing built what they believed was a foolproof locking mechanism.
What they do is they build in multiple redundancies to make sure the door is properly latched and does not open. And you build it in to a point of that it's extremely improbable that the door would ever open.
So what went wrong on Flight 811? The Campbells soon discovered the problem lay in the design of the locking mechanism. To lock the cargo door on the 747, electric motors rotate C-shaped latches around pins in the door frame. A handle then moves L-shaped arms, known as locking sectors, over the top of the C latches to prevent them from opening. But as early as 1975, problems were found with the locking sectors. Kevin Campbell, an experienced engineer, built a model to show the weakness in the Boeing design.
Initially, the locking sectors were made in aluminium, and in 1975, Boeing realised that they weren't strong enough, and they actually doubled up the aluminium to make it double thickness. But it still wasn't strong enough, and a lot of the airlines didn't even put the doublers on anyway.
The weakness of the aluminum drastically increased the risk of the door accidentally opening.
With the aluminium locking sectors, if the C-locks tried to backwind, open electrically, it would just push the locking sector out of the way. It just simply wasn't up to the job that it was designed for.
For 20 years before the catastrophe on Flight 811, 747s had been flying with this crucial weakness. The Campbells wondered what else remained to be revealed. They redoubled their efforts to uncover the full truth behind the accident that had killed their son.
We bought a car and set off in the United States to see as many people who were involved with the accident as possible. We started at Seattle, crossed to Chicago, through to Washington, D.C., down to Kentucky, on to Miami, then back across to San Diego, back up to Seattle. And that was just one trip.
The Campbells soon found that a shockingly similar incident to Flight 811 had given clear warnings of the danger in the cargo door. 1987, 2 years before Flight 811, a Pan Am 747 had been climbing out of Heathrow when it failed to pressurize at 20,000 feet. The pilots had to turn back.
When they got back to Heathrow, they found that the door was hanging open 1.5 inches at the bottom and all of the locks were open. When it got to the maintenance base, they found that all of the locking sectors were either bent or broken.
Why had the sea latches turned and bent back the locking sectors? Boeing claimed that ground crew must have mishandled the mechanism. But the Campbells' investigation uncovered another vital clue to why the sea latches had turned. A report highlighted problems with the door's electrical system.
It had a fault in the S2 master latch lock switch that should have turned off the power to the door when the outer handle was closed.
This was an alarming finding. When the outer handle was closed, the S2 master lock switch was meant to disconnect the power supply and stop the sea latch motors from turning. So could this have failed, allowing the motors to open the door? To find out, Boeing asked the airlines to do a simple test. Close the outer handle, then press the switch to open the door and see what happens.
When they hit the switch, it actually worked. Boeing thought, you know, this is not going to work, but it actually worked. There was power to the door locks with the outer handle closed, and the lock started to move, and it started to force the locking sectors out of the way. And a few days later, the airline started ringing in and saying it was damaging their planes. So Boeing stopped the test. But it meant that on those aircraft, the S2 switch had failed, which is a silent failure. And all of those aircraft were likely to have the same problem as 811. They were just waiting for a short circuit to open the doors.
The Campbells now became convinced that the accident on Flight 811 began with the failure of the S2 switch. Power remained onto the sea latch motors. All it took was a short circuit in the 20-year-old wiring, which had been found to be frayed on other aircraft, to start the motors up. The aluminum locking sectors were too weak to stop the latches turning, and the cargo door burst open.
The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the
After a year of investigation, the NTSB had a different version of the events. The Campbells were in for a shock. After waiting a year for the official report, Kevin and Susan Campbell expected it to match their theory of what led to the accident on Flight 811.
I assumed that we would have a report come out that this was an electrical malfunction, and was staggered when they came out and said that the door had been mishandled.
For the Campbells, the NTSB's flawed explanation and failure to mention the electrical problems just wasn't good enough. They went back to investigating the accident on Flight 811 and soon found disturbing evidence of how it could and should have been prevented. After the Pan Am incident in 1987, it turned out that Boeing had issued a directive to the airlines on how to correct the weak aluminum locking sectors.
The airworthiness directive that came out was to replace the aluminum sectors with steel sectors that could not be bent. And there were some some interim requirements for inspections to be performed until what they call terminating action, the steel sectors were installed.
The fix was cheap and simple, but getting it done was not.
The actual cost of the modification, changing these locking sectors to steel, was $2,000 per aircraft. But it took 10 hours to do it, and that's where the money was. Taking the aircraft out of service for 10 hours, that's millions of dollars.
The Campbells discovered that back in 1988, the FAA, whose role it is to enforce improvements, had given the airlines 18 months to comply. Within a year, Lee Campbell and 8 others would die in an avoidable accident. So why weren't the airlines forced to fix the problem sooner?
If these airplanes, these large commercial airplanes, are grounded, it's an economic disaster. So what they do is they lobby in the regulatory agency in the United States, it's the FAA, to allow them to do the fixes over time when the airplanes are in for normal maintenance. And that way, they're not taken out of service. But when they do that, when they allow the airlines, the air carriers, and the manufacturers to fix these over time, in essence what the FAA is doing is they're gambling with the lives of the passengers and the crew that are flying the airplanes during the time they're not fixed.
After the deaths on Flight 811, the FAA instantly shortened the deadline for fixing the cargo door from 18 months to just 30 days. The pressure of the Campbell's campaign eventually began to pay off. The vital piece of evidence that could prove them right, the cargo door, still lay 2 miles down in the Pacific Ocean. But as articles appeared in the American press, the NTSB commissioned the U.S. Navy to search for it. 100 miles south of Honolulu, a deep submersible began to trawl the seabed.
We went to Honolulu and waited there while they had their attempts. And they finally recovered the door from 14,000 feet of water, which was the deepest recovery ever at that time. And we were phoned within an hour of it coming out of the water.
But before the Campbells could see it, the door was swiftly removed to Boeing's plant in Seattle. The Campbells went in hot pursuit.
We went over to Boeing and they wouldn't show it to us. So they reckoned that the crucial pieces had gone to the NTSB. So again, we got in the car and drove across to Washington, D.C. We arrived at Ron Schleid's office, and Ron looks at his watch and he says, "I can give you 5 minutes." So about 3 hours later, we had the pieces that they recovered in our hand. And they acknowledged that we were definitely correct. It was an electrical malfunction.
Finally, the NTSB publicly issued a revised report that concurred with the Campbells' version.
There was an inadvertent failure of either the switch or the wiring that caused an uncommanded opening of the door.
It's nice that other people know that you're right and had been all along, and that the support that they had given you was vindicated.
The Campbells spent thousands of dollars of their own money on their campaign. They were never interested in a financial settlement for Lee's death, but they did persuade United and Boeing to set up a university scholarship in his name.
I couldn't have lived with myself if we had done no investigating ourselves. It was just something we both felt we needed to do. We didn't even discuss it. We just knew that's what we would do.
Yeah.
But despite long and public campaigns like that of the Campbells, critics fear that the airline industry has not learned the lessons from Flight 811.
The regulatory agencies, they have a dual charge. One is to encourage aviation, and another is aviation safety. And when they get in a position where you have economics up against air safety, they tend to err on the side of economics rather than safety.
Serious accidents caused by known defects have continued to occur. In the 1990s, known problems in aircraft de-icing systems led to crashes. At least 3 planes have had fatal fires due to known dangers from flammable insulation material. In 1998, a fully laden 747 blew itself up over the Atlantic when known faults in the old wiring ignited known hazards in the fuel tanks. Inevitably, experts are skeptical about the industry's record of balancing profit against prevention.
And what the industry says, to go in and replace this wiring would ground all these airplanes, would be astronomically expensive. One airplane every 10 years, one airplane every 5 years, 200-300 people, cost of doing business. Cost of doing business. And that's a great economic analysis, and unless your mother or your child is on board one of these airplanes that happens to pay the price for their economic satisfaction.
For some of the survivors of Flight 811, the cost has been heavy.
Each crew member handled it differently. I know there are still 2 crew members that have never set foot on an aircraft again. It was very difficult for me. I was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. You can't reason, you can't think. Making the slightest decision is very difficult. You're just at a total loss. So it was very difficult to cope with.
And you didn't need to wait for a command in this situation. There was fire, and I shouted to Suzanne, "Fire on the wing." She ran back to my exit and saw Suzanne standing there, getting ready to open the door, and just saw the door crumple like cheap tinfoil. And I thought, oh my God, we're trapped. I was staring at the door, and I yelled, "Unfasten your seatbelts, remove your shoes, leave everything, come this way." And as I stared at the door, a jagged hole seemed to open up in the roof over the door. And the next thing I knew, I was outside that. I don't know how I got out there. Joan was standing there yelling, "Suzanne, take my hand." And I was standing above the level of the door on fuselage rubble pieces. And I leaned down and said to Suzanne, "Give me your hand." She grabbed me out with one hand. I mean, I don't know how she lifted me. And then we were standing up on top of almost on top of this airplane. And I thought, it's really a long ways down. If we jump, we're going to break our legs. We were on debris. It was like ice flows, big chunks of fuselage kind of moving all around. The engines were starting to disintegrate already. We could hear them disintegrating and throwing metal. I lost Joan's hand very quickly, so I jumped. And it seemed like the leap from a second-story building.
The captain, he elected to jump down in the first-class section of the airplane, and when he hit the first-class floor, the floor collapsed and he fell on down into the cargo area. It was so hot that the oxygen bottles exploded and burned him very badly, as a matter of fact.
It was a survival mode that kicked in, and it was just get out of that airplane. I didn't stop to think about how it happened.
I went to where the door would have been, and I left my wife seated. And then it came to me, what am I doing? Where's my wife? So I turned around, and she was coming, and I said, "I will jump and try and break your fall."
My husband was sitting to my right, and I undid his seatbelt and kind of pushed him out of his seat to get him moving. And we headed for the door that was closest to us. And it was engulfed in flames, and there was no way to exit that way. I looked over, and at some point, someone had opened the other door, which was amazing to me. And I just yelled over here and headed toward the door on the other side, which was, again, the wing door.
In the haste to get out of the burning plane, Karen became separated from her husband. He died in the flames.
I immediately thought it was total destruction. It never dawned on me that I would make it. But I thought, hey, do something. Don't just sit there, do something. I just went over the seat backs, and I'm not that athletic really, but I went over 3 rows of seats. One man was sitting there looking like I need help, but I couldn't help him.
When KLM hit us, all communication stopped. The tower called and couldn't get any response from either the KLM or ourselves. There was an airplane in the holding pattern right above Tenerife. Called the tower and said, "I see smoke and wreckage on your runway."
Rodeos approach Sterling 105. We're downwind from runway 30 and something's glowing on the field. Looks like a fire. Are you aware of any fire?
Shit, this can't be true!
on, come on! Come on, come on!
He hits the emergency warning. After KLM hit us, he went on down the runway and hit on the runway 1,500 feet down, closer to the tower. So when the fire truck and the ambulance came out, they got to him first. So no one came to us for quite a while. As a matter of fact, I remember thinking, I wonder why somebody hasn't gotten out here to help us.
It's complete bedlam. In the fog, the fire trucks don't know where to go. When they eventually find the Dutch plane, it's hopeless. Everyone's dead. And the whole time, they don't realize there's a second plane a short distance away, hidden in the mist, with people waiting to be saved. It's another 20 minutes before the Pan Am plane is discovered. Only 20% of the Pan Am passengers get out alive, and most of them are gathered on the left wing, which has somehow miraculously remained intact.
The entire left wing of the airplane was covered with passengers. And it turned out there were probably 45 to 50 passengers out on that wing.
I've never asked anybody how high the wing is from the ground on a 747, but it looks to be a very long ways.
And I cut open my head and fractured my foot. My wife jumped after me, and she said, "I cannot walk." And I dragged her on her side for probably a block and a half away from the plane.
The motors were going full tilt, and I didn't want to get over where the motors were, so I sat down by the body of the plane. I had no comprehension at that moment that I would be jumping off the wing and
In the debris, you knew there were trapped passengers and people, and there was absolutely nothing you could do to help because the airplane was collapsing in on people.
Only one door was opened by a crew member, and that was one of the black flight attendants who did that. And she lost her life when the engine disintegrated and debris hit her. And I thought if we could just walk around to the other side of the plane, we would find all of the passengers and our other fellow crew members, which of course wasn't the case.
Even 20 minutes after the disaster, the controllers in the tower still have no idea how serious things are.
Departing aircraft. All departures are suspended until advised. Hello.
I'll get local fire out of here. Notify the ambulance. We have an emergency. We need every vehicle they've got.
What have we done? It's can't be our fault, I mean, I told him to clear the taxiway.
When I got out on the ground, I could hear people screaming and yelling and all. Within about 5 minutes, you heard absolutely nothing. There was no noise at all, just the airplane burning. I asked one of our medical directors later on what he calls that, and he said that when you have a fire that hot and that much of a fire, it consumes all of the oxygen in there, and people basically suffocate.
I felt so responsible because I couldn't take care of my passengers, and so helpless in looking back and knowing that there's nothing you can do. You can't get back in the aircraft. There's no way to get in it, and it's all on fire.
Of the KLM plane, very little remains. It had continued flying for another 400 meters before slamming into the ground. The 55 tons of fuel it had taken on ensured that everyone on board died in the fiery explosion.
It was personal vehicles, cars and trucks that seemed to come onto the grass and gather up people.
about 75% of our surviving passengers got to the hospital in taxicabs.
It was a wild, crazy ride as we were going to the hospital. The skin was hanging on both hands because I had received burns, but it hadn't affected my eyes.
I had blood all over me, and I walked up to somebody and said, "I'm a doctor, can I help?" And the guy that I said it to had the oddest look on his face, just this very wan smile, and he just shook his head, and then I immediately went into a coma.
Word soon gets out, and in the hours that follow, the international press begin to arrive, and the first news is flashed around the world.
Rescue workers are still going through the wreckage of the 2 jetliners this morning in the Canary Islands. They're looking for the bodies of victims in this worst accident in aviation history. 2 jumbo jetliners, 747s, collided on the ground at the airport at Santa Cruz de Tenerife yesterday morning.
One was a Pan Am charter from Los Angeles that picked up more people in New York before flying to the Canaries. The other was a KLM charter from Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
They set up a morgue in one of the hangars, and it was huge, and they had all of the nearly 600 bodies in that particular hangar, or temporary morgue.
The death toll rises to 583 people, nearly twice as big as any previous accident. And then everyone begins asking the same questions. How and why could 2 state-of-the-art airliners smash into each other on the same runway? Very soon, a whole army of investigators begins arriving from the 3 countries involved, Spain, Holland, and the United States. Under the rules that govern this sort of thing, they all have a right to be there, but that doesn't mean they're going to get along. In Spain, the military still runs everything, including aviation. When the American team from the National Transportation Safety Board arrives, the Spanish general in charge won't even let them into the room.
I sneaked in, and I went to the general and told him, "The general, my name is Luis Carmona. I represent the U.S. government, the NTSB, and I am here to participate in the investigation." He answered back to me, "I represent the king, and you get out." So as I was walking out, he looked at me again, and he said, "Hey, you don't look American." And I told him, "Well, yes, I am an American, but I was born in Cuba." And he said, "Well, so did I. I was also born in Cuba." So he turned around and he asked me questions and asked me to bring my team in, and we started doing the accident investigation then.
The investigators discover the chain of coincidences that had led remorselessly to the deaths of 583 people. If any one of them had not occurred, neither would the accident. The first had nothing to do with airplanes. A terrorist bombing perpetrated by a small group fighting for their independence. Their intent was to create publicity for their cause. In that, they certainly succeeded.
There are 2 bombs in the terminal. You have 10 minutes to save as many lives as you wish.
The airport is closed. Divert to Los Oleos Airport via Tenerife VOR. Descent flight level 250.
Because of the bomb, all air traffic was rerouted to Los Rodeos Airport on the neighboring island of Tenerife. But it's a small regional airfield with only 1 runway. A 747 can land there. The runway is long enough, but that's all. The airport is ill-equipped and unable to handle that amount of planes or people.
Lima Tango 107, you are clear to descend to flight level 80.
Subject 282, switch to ground now.
Contact standby for taxi clearance. KLM 4805, clear to land runway 30. Pan Am 1736.
Pan Am 1736, short final.
As luck would have it, this tidal wave of traffic happens on a Sunday afternoon when there are just 2 controllers on duty. They're good, but not used to handling as many airplanes as on that day. big airplanes that need lots of room to park. They are confronted with an enormous jigsaw puzzle.
We'll be here all night, you know that, right?
Or you can go out there and pave us another runway.
Meanwhile, in the KLM cockpit, the stress is mounting.
Any idea of how much longer we've got before we need to get other crew down to take over?
Yeah, well...
KLM had recently introduced new company rules which handed out severe penalties for pilots who exceeded their flying hours.
What happens if we go over the civil and company time limits?
Well, you get hung out to dry. You lose your license, your career, everything.
The KLM plane has to get away before 5:30 that afternoon or abandon the flight. Hundreds of passengers would then have to be found hotels on this small island. A new crew would have to be flown in from Amsterdam. The expense would be enormous.
Willem, since we're trapped in here until the passengers get back, we might as well take on some fuel.
But that seemingly simple decision seals the fate of everyone aboard the KLM. Refueling not only delays him for half an hour and the Pan Am stuck behind him, it makes the KLM plane so heavy it'll be unable to lift off and clear the Pan Am plane on the runway. The half-hour delay has another effect. During that time, the weather changes abruptly. Los Rodeos is an unusual airport. It's on a plateau high in the hills.
Los Rodeos Airport is at 2,000 feet elevation, and the normal clouds in that area, they stay about 2,000 feet. So when the wind blows the clouds over the airport, it closes the airport. The visibility goes to zero. And it goes on and off all the time.
Unfortunately, for an airport that's constantly lost in fog, Los Rodeos is ill-equipped to deal with it. It has no ground radar so that controllers can see where the planes are. In fact, the facilities are downright primitive.
When he was not, they had a person sitting in a building next to the runway, and he just took a visual measurement of the weather, and that's how the weather was checked. And that's about all.
In the fog that day, both aircraft are invisible to the controllers.
I lost them. I can't see no visual contact.
There are no runway center lights working either. Visibility is on the borderline of what is safe. In fact, as far as the Pan Am crew is concerned, it's below the legal minimum, so no aircraft can take off.
Look at it out there. I mean, this cloud just rolled right onto us. I don't think anybody has the minimums now.
But the Dutch are working to a different set of rules. The scene is all set for a disaster. What will actually trigger it? The Dutch investigators thought they'd found the reasons.
God damn it. Of all the days this has to happen, just when Spain is going to teach Hungary a lesson in football.
The controllers, they say, were listening to the football on the radio. Perhaps their minds weren't on the job. Furthermore, their bad English had confused the pilots.
Taxi into the runway.
And leave the runway third. Third to your left. Third to the left, okay.
Third, he said?
3. Third.
Third to your left.
I thought he said
Leave the
first.
runway third to your left.
Third one, sir. 1, 2, 3. Third one.
1, 2. Good, well, that's what we need, right? The third one.
1, 2, 3.
We were listening to the controller talking to the other airplanes. We were listening to the controller giving the ATC clearances, the taxi clearances. And he spoke clear enough English for anyone, I think. So I'd have to say no, I don't think the controller was involved at all. I don't think he had any fault at all in this accident.
1736, just check in with that.
That's the 45 there.
But the Dutch haven't finished yet.
Yeah, that's this one here.
Yeah, I know.
They make an even more controversial claim, one that provokes a blazing row, that the Pan Am plane had caused the accident by being on the runway when it shouldn't have been. They hadn't followed orders to turn off.
Okay, for sure.
Maybe he counts these as 3.
Oh, I like this.
They were going to taxiway 4. He was instructed to go on 3, but he had to go 4 because taxiway number 4 was the one that had 45 degrees, and it was easy for the 747 to access it.
We said, confirm which taxiway you want us to take. And he says, the third on your left, 1, 2, 3, the third on your left. And here again, I still believe this. I think he had seen us go by the first one, and when he says, count 3 more taxiways, the third, 1, 2, 3, we were doing exactly what we thought he meant for us to do, and I still think that's what he meant for us to do. It was the logical taxiway to take.
Whether they should have taken the third or fourth exit became largely irrelevant anyway, because it became clear that Captain Van Zanten had made one of the most elementary mistakes a pilot can make. He'd taken off without permission.
We have 700 meters visibility here now.
Wait a minute. We don't have ATC clearance.
I know that. Go ahead, ask.
KLM 4805 is now ready for takeoff. We're waiting for ATC clearance.
KLM 4805, you're clear to the Papa Beacon.
The KLM is given its ATC clearance, which is simply the route it must follow after takeoff. Now, it must wait for permission to take off.
325 radial at Las Palmas VOR.
Roger, sir. We're cleared to the Papa Beacon, flight level 90. Right turn out 040 until intercepting the 325. We're
going.
But why didn't his crew stop him?
It's very difficult for a co-pilot or a flight engineer to tell the captain, hey, look, you missed something.
Tenerife exposed a problem that had long existed in commercial air travel. The pilot was regarded, and often regarded himself, as God.
The captain is always right. He's never wrong.
No junior officer was ever going to contradict the airline's top pilot, the man who'd given him his license.
Panam 1736, report runway cleared.
Did you clear that?
What do you say?
Is it to clear the Panam?
Oh, yes.
Captain Van Zanten, highly stressed, knowing that he has to take off or abandon the flight. His crew, aware that he's done wrong but frightened to tell him. Disaster is now inevitable.
God damn. Come.
The official report is written by Spain. It blames the accident on Captain Van Zanten's decision to take off without permission. The Dutch refuse to accept it. They publish their own report, blaming language difficulties and the general confusion at Los Rodeos.
What I learned from the Tenerife accident is that regardless of how well qualified, experienced, professional, and exact professional you are, okay, accidents, as long as human beings are involved, accidents can always take place.
The insurers pay out a record sum, $2 billion in today's money. As for the survivors, the images of the 27th of March will always be with them. They've just learned to live with them, that's all.
And whenever I have friends that travel, I tell them, make sure you know where your exit is, make sure you read all that stuff, know how to get out of the airplane. I mean, those are important things.
I never had nightmares. I had only dreams about being helpless and being at an airport behind a big, thick window and watching an airplane take off and knowing that it was going to crash and wanting to shout out, but there was this big, thick glass window. You're just helpless, and that's what you feel, is this, because our responsibility is to take care of everyone, and that's what we want to do, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't save them.
The loss of my husband had a tremendous impact on my life, on my son's life, on my extended family's lives. It was huge.
And you can see how strange life is, you know, that things like that happen, that you get off and they go on, and perhaps if the plane left a minute later, it wouldn't have happened.
I think it brought home to me how quickly you can leave this life and how everyone should enjoy life every and each day as much as you possibly can.
Well, after the crash, I decided to start a family. I thought maybe I will stay home and have children.
I thought You know, my friends have died, and if I let myself sit in this little apartment, it's going to be as if I'm curled up and died, and that's not fair to them. I can honor them best by living a life, a full life, and not being afraid.
I am blessed because I do not have any horror left over from the accident.
I felt ashamed the first while. And a long time I thought, you know, I wish I died because I felt very bad.
I was scared for quite a while after the crash, but I knew if I flew with Joan, she would pull me out again.
I had to quit the NTSB. I didn't retire. I felt so bad that I became ill. I had to go to a doctor and get some medication because I got sick.
I went back to Tenerife, my wife and I had a driver take me out to the airport and show me the runway, and I looked at it all. I did it all over again. And then I went back and took the Golden Odyssey steamship from the Royal Cruise Line to sort of complete the situation which I had missed.